The Event Industry News podcast is sponsored by Present Communications. Present provides broadcast quality live, hybrid, and virtual event production trusted by organizations where reliability really matters. From corporate town halls and conferences to high-profile live streams, they design and deliver fully resilient systems that work first time. Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson, wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. As always, recording on a Monday morning from home, the Monday after Spain have won the World Cup. So for context, if you're listening to this on a future date, you know exactly when I'm recording this. And for any of our Spanish followers for the podcast, and of course, if you work in the events industry and you are from Spain, congratulations to you all. The end of a huge global event. And that's exactly why we're here on the podcast every week, is to talk about events, to talk about things that are happening. And I'm delighted to say that on today's podcast, not one, but two guests to give me an insight into something that they've been collaborating on. And we'll find out more about that as we get into the episode. My guests today are Anita Macdonald, Marketing Manager at Meet Cambridge, and Andy Williamson, the founder at Welcome Brain Consulting. And we're going to be talking about the new Neuro Inclusive Networking Guide that launched just a few weeks ago at the meeting show. So let's welcome our guests. Anita and Andy, a very warm welcome to the podcast to you both.
Morning, thank you.
Hello, nice.
Let's start by getting to know a little bit about you both before we get into what I introduced there at the start of the podcast, this new Neuro Inclusive Networking Guide. Anita, let's come to you first of all. Welcome along to the podcast, a first-time guest. Well, to both of you, of course, as first-time guests. But tell us a little bit about yourself, Anita, and exactly what your role is at Meet Cambridge and what Meet Cambridge is.
Okay, thanks, James. And just want to echo congratulations, Spain, Viva España, and all of that. Well done, everybody. My name's Anita Macdonald. I'm the marketing manager at Meet Cambridge. So we are predominantly a venue finding agency for anybody who's looking to host any type of event in Cambridge, and we have links with the Cambridge colleges and university buildings, as well as strategic relationships with venues in and around the city. So my job predominantly is marketing Cambridge to event professionals and how it can work for them.
I was going to say, if that background's anything to go by, it shouldn't take much marketing. It shouldn't take much marketing.
Yeah, that's my next door neighbour.
Fabulous. Thanks, Anita. And Andy, same to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what Welcome Brain is as an organisation.
So Welcome Brain is a neurodiversity consultancy. So we work, anything to do with neurodiversity is our jam, really, and that's quite a broad range of things. So we provide workshops and trainings and consultancy, policy help, things like that. But we do a lot of work in the events industry through what we're going to talk about today. But through the ABCO working group that we joined, we've done a lot of work on networking in neuro inclusion in events. We put together about a year ago the neurodiversity in events checklist, which is a guide on how to make your events neuro-inclusive, a free guide, I might add, on how to make your events neuro-inclusive. We also have a neuro-inclusive venue accreditation, so venues can get accredited, show off their credentials. And then we just recently launched the networking guide on how you can make networking neuro-inclusive. So everything we do is driven by the idea of making things actionable, practical, easy to access, and so that people actually do it.
And yeah, please, Anita, jump in.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that whilst the focus is around neurodiversity, with the task force that Andy and I belong to under the ABCO umbrella, something that we've found, and this is something that Andy champions, is that when you start looking after your neurodiverse community and attendees, it actually benefits everybody. So whilst we're using this umbrella of neurodiversity, actually the changes that you bring into your events will benefit everybody. So it's kind of like, I don't want it to kind of like be pigeonholed that it's all about neurodiversity. Whilst that's what our focus is today and on this podcast, it's as I said, it benefits everybody.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we'll touch more on that and sort of talk in a little bit more detail on that. But let's take it back to the actual guide itself first of all, and get into some sort of the obvious questions that people may be sort of shouting now down towards their devices as they listen to us today. What prompted it, first of all, Anita? What was the sort of the driving factor behind it? What was the genesis of this guide being researched and then produced?
So this Andy alluded to a moment ago is that we created a new neurodiversity at events checklist about a year ago, and it went down really, really well. And we kind of wanted to keep the momentum going. So we came together as a group and thought, right, what can we look at next? And I think we put a poll out as well to event professionals within ABCO and within our own networks about asking people, what do you want us to look at next? And networking came up high. And I'm not neurodiverse. I see myself as neurotypical, but even I struggle with networking, going into a room when I don't know anybody. The noise levels as well, and when you see people talking in little cliques, I find it overwhelming. And I'm just thinking, if I find myself as neurotypical, what is it like for somebody who identifies or who even perhaps has neurodiverse characteristics and hasn't even realised they're in that sphere? How on earth does it feel for them? So that's kind of how it came about. And what we did is that we put a survey together and we put it out to anybody who's ever attended an event. Doesn't matter whether it's a conference, a meeting, a dinner, a networking, a family gathering, and it didn't matter whether they were an ABCO member or not, or an event professionals. We opened it up to everybody within our networks, asking them questions about how they feel when they attend an event, how does and around networking, how does it make them feel, and what changes would they like to see? And I think the overwhelming result was nobody likes it. The traditional format of all being shoved in the same room with catering, glasses clinking, lots of noise, music going on, quite bright lights, nobody likes it. So it kind of begs the question, if nobody likes it, why are we sticking to this traditional format? Something needs to give, something needs to change. And that's kind of how we started to evolve it. Andy, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Because obviously you collated the results.
We all started from the same position. Is anecdotally, I think we were all uncomfortable with networking as is, and we all sort of swapped horror stories. But I mean, from a neuro inclusion perspective, the two most common things that neurodivergent people can traditionally struggle with are crowds and sensory overload. And those two things are what networking is, really. So at sort of a first principles perspective, it seemed like it was ripe for re-examination. So that was where we started. That was the problem we identified. And then it turned out from doing the survey that most people did agree with us. Neurotypical and neurodivergent people agreed with this.
Was there a stereotypical networking scene that was created almost like as a, that there's sort of 90% of scenarios that we are referencing here? Because when I think of networking, and Anita, forgive me if I've misunderstood this, but the way that you were describing it, I'm thinking, classic hotel conference room, 150 people walking in there, teas, coffees and everything. But, networking goes on at huge trade shows, at places like Excel and the NEC. Networking goes on at awards dinners. Was there a sort of a benchmark? Was there a stereotypical layout and scenario that was painted in order to sort of create this list?
Yeah, and that was borne out by the results of the survey, actually, is what we had sort of in our mind's eye was this idea of unstructured mingling. Like you said, so we're at a conference, there's an hour set aside in the conference hall where we can get tea and coffees or a glass of wine or something and do our unstructured mingling there. That sort of formal networking. The networking that happens organically at a dinner or something like that is a slightly different issue. But we were focused mostly on this unstructured mingling, which is still the default for most networking, where we sort of just drop kick everybody in a room together and say, have at it. That's what we had, and that's what we wanted to change. And it was very clear from the results. That's what most people didn't like. The awkwardness of having to hold your saucer with your tea on it and manage the handshake, or people are standing in triangles. How can I break in? That sort of deal was what we were looking to change.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to hear some of the practical tips, because I'm already thinking in my head of operationally stuff that I see day to day, and whether or not that's manifested what I see sometimes and think, why have they not done that? I'm really curious to see if it's manifested itself in the report. So I'll give you a real life example. I was running a conference for the biosciences industry last week. In a very what I'd call stereotypical conference setup, a conference room laid out theatre style, and an adjacent room with some sponsors and exhibitors with tabletops, and in the centre, a big coffee station and where the lunch buffet served. No tables and nowhere for people to sit down, which meant that everybody was stood balancing tea and coffee and balancing their lunch buffet plates, kind of with elbows tucked in, because it was quite a tight room. And I just thought, what a silly, why not just put a space aside where people can actually sit and eat their lunch comfortably? That's not necessarily a neurodivergent thing. That's just a basic well-being and a basic operational practicality. Is it stuff that's as simple as that that's addressed in the guide, Anita?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think one of my sort of favourite things, that there was two that came out that I really liked, and these were ideas that came from respondents to the survey and within the group itself. So one was having a networking buddy, and it could be somebody within your committee, somebody within your organising group, that would make introductions. So if you're new to a conference, new to an event, they would actually help you make introductions and introduce you to a group. And it just having somebody do that and breaking that barrier down, I know certainly for myself, would be really nice, because that's standing on the periphery and thinking, oh crikey, who do I talk to? It's really, really hard. And then another one that came out was when people register, so as well as putting their name and their organisation, maybe having just 3 words of things that they're happy to talk about. And then it could be something really random, or it could be something to do with the event or the field of science that they're looking at. And we tested this out at ABCO back in April, and I know that seemed to go down really well, because it kind of gave an introduction. So whilst you might be looking at somebody's chest at their name badge, you could actually see things that they were happy to talk about. So for me, dogs, I love dogs. And if I find a fellow dog lover, we've already got a connection. We haven't got to break those barriers down. And I think that's what we were looking at, is just how can we make it literally more accessible to everybody that's attending. And I think this is a key thing, that anybody who's attended an event, they sort of said, what's your biggest take home? It's the connections that they make. They remember the people that they met, really, potentially more than the speakers, more than the program. It's who they met, who do they get chatting to, who do they want to continue that conversation with. And if your networking is not enabling that, then what is your event about?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's Andy, I'll bring you in on this to ask. I was smiling then, because I love the idea of having 3 words on a name badge that allows you to kick off a conversation with somebody, rather than the usual walking up, oh, hello, what do you do? Which company are you from? It's boring as well, isn't it? If you can get talking and find common ground with somebody unrelated to your work or the reason that you're there at that event, you can actually then open up a more meaningful conversation when you do get round to talking about the business side of things.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's about making those connections seem less transactional, I think, is actually what makes them much more effective. And sort of following on from what Anita was saying is none of this has to be really difficult or really involved or hard work. The way that the networking guide is structured, it's a silver, gold, and platinum level, depending on your appetite for work and the size of your event and all things like that. So silver, if you want to just do the sort of the basics, turn the background music off so that people can actually hear one another when they're networking. I mean, that has no cost to it whatsoever. It actually results in less work, because you don't have to choose a playlist or get the speakers out or anything like that. That's the sort of the level of silver level. And then, like you said, introducing a bit of structure can be something as simple as laying out some question cards on the tables or the area around with icebreaker style questions. And they don't have to be cheesy. They could be something like, what's the worst film you've ever seen? What's one of the funniest things that's ever happened to you at work, or something like that? Just anything that is just going to break that ice. And then you start having those organic conversations that then might lead to a sort of a transactional relationship down the road. But you've bypassed that sort of awkward standoff at the start, and it's a very level playing field. But when we talk about structured networking, that's what we're talking about. It's just those little sort of elements that facilitate the introduction. That's all it has to be. And then obviously, as Anita was saying, having sort of a host or a facilitator who can make those introductions is really, really nice as well.
The upside for that, in terms of the host or facilitator, the upside for that is good sort of PR for the organizer as well. That's a level of customer service that would be welcomed by any delegate or attendee at an event, regardless of whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. If somebody came up to me at an event, if I was an attendee, and said, look, can I help you make any introductions? I'm from the organisers, is there anybody you'd like to meet? I think that'd just be a great level of service before we get into labeling it anything.
Yeah, I think that's true. Sorry, go on, Anita.
No, I was just saying, we're in the hospitality business. Is hospitality not about making people feel comfortable and being hospitable to one another?
Exactly.
So
yeah,
exactly right.
When it comes to,
and I think we forget that sometimes, don't we? The hospitality is associated with hotels and restaurants, and in the events industry, I think we don't often consider ourselves to be working in hospitality, but we are. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, and I was going to pick up on the other side of that. Is the hospitality business. It is a business, so ultimately what you're selling often with events is you're selling, the networking and the people who are going to attend. So if you're not doing that effectively, you're selling a defective product and improving it and making it better. And this neuro inclusive networking, as we've said repeatedly, makes your networking more effective for everybody. So neurotypical people as well. So if you're selling networking, but it's not really working, if it is just unstructured mingling, then you're not paying the same attention to it as you are to every other element of the events that you're running. And so if you just invest a little bit of effort into it, it will improve it, and then you will have a better product. So there's a commercial imperative to that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on, Anita.
Sorry, I didn't mean to keep talking over you. But I was going to say, I agree and concur with what Andy said, and with the actual guide. We're not saying that you've got to do every single point. It's even just making one or two changes could make a massive difference.
Yeah.
So, it's not being afraid to make the change. And the changes that we've put in the guide, as Andy has said, some of them are of no cost. But if you have got a bit of money, this is where you go up to the gold and platinum levels and it's using technology, because as technology is evolving, it's making life easier, certainly, I think, around networking and with hosting events. But it's, you don't have to we're not suggesting that you've got to do everything in this list. Even if you can just bring one or two changes, we truly believe you'll see a difference.
Well,
and you'll get good feedback.
The technology subject is an interesting one to bring in here, because you mentioned budgets and working at different levels depending on at the top end. If somebody's got the budget to use something like an event app that has matchmaking built into it, where all the attendee details and pre-registrations are loaded in there, everyone's profile is created. There are some great matchmaking tools built into event apps now that use sophisticated algorithms and match stuff up. Great if you've got the budget. But at the opposite end of the spectrum, the example that you gave earlier, Anita, where people might just give you 3 words that they're happy for, things that they're happy to talk about. If you had that on something as simple as a spreadsheet, and you put that spreadsheet into everybody's accessible AI like Copilot or Gemini, one of those easily accessible platforms could also spit out matchmaking and look at that data and think, right, that person might want to talk to that person. So the tech now, because of how accessible AI is, even the most simple registration data can be interpreted and maybe used in a better way, even if you don't have access to these sophisticated platforms. I just wanted to make that point, that it doesn't have to be expensive to be able to utilize really good tech nowadays.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that, and isn't it, I know myself, when I've been on a conference app, if I could see somebody who's perhaps got common likes or dislikes to myself, I'm naturally going to gravitate towards them, and I just think, oh, I'd quite like to speak to them. Or if I see them, I know already before I've attended, got to the event, there's somebody who has a similar likes to me. And I know in this world of equity, diversity and inclusion, there is talk about, don't always gravitate to people who think and look like you. Do go to people who will challenge your views and opinions. But I think when it comes to networking, and there's a lot of noise around finding your tribe, finding your community, if you just have that icebreaker conversation, or you can get yourself through that door, and get yourself over the threshold and just start that conversation, it will give you the confidence to then approach other people, so who will perhaps challenge your views and opinions and make you a better person. And I think, just going back a little bit, so as I said, we put together the neurodiversity at events checklist, and Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but 1 in 5 people who identify as neurodiverse won't attend events. Full stop. It's too overwhelming. It's too much. It's 20% of the population. So, and that's for those who identify as neurodiverse. For those who don't identify as neurodiverse, that stat could be even higher. So if we can make just simple little changes, just think how many more people would be interested in your event and attending your event because they feel welcome, they're not feeling excluded. And Andy, sorry, I keep coming back to you, but I just remember our early conversations a year ago. It was a brilliant phrase. And he said, instead of calling people out, let's call them in, let's welcome them in. And I keep using that mantra with everything that I do that's around EDI, not just neurodiversity, but anything to do with EDI. Let's welcome people in.
Andy, could I ask, how important is it that organisers publicise any changes or developments, however big or small or however subtle they may be? How important is it that organisers actually publicise that to their delegates?
Well, I think it's very important, for the reason Anita was just saying, is that a lot of neurodivergent people can choose to stay away from events if they think that they're not neuroinclusive, and also, they might leave midway through because they don't like the idea of this networking that's coming up in the afternoon, or participation doesn't just mean being there in the first place; it means staying there, actually asking questions, things like that. So I think it's really important. We always recommend, when people do the neurodiversity and events checklist and have their event accredited, that they publicise it as much as possible to let people know this is neuroinclusive. And with the Neuro Inclusive Networking Guide, we decided to make it a self-assessment scheme. So event planners, if they're planning a Neuro Inclusive Networking, they use the guide, they work through it, they can themselves certify their networking as being neuroinclusive. And really, you should publicise it. Absolutely, sing it from the rooftops, evangelise about it. For the reasons that you're going to encourage more people to go, people are going to feel like it's a psychologically safer space, but also put pressure on everyone else who's not running a neuro-inclusive networking. So because we want this eventually to become the default, so that these changes aren't hard to do. People can do them. So we increasingly want it to be the case that if someone's not running a neuro-inclusive networking event, people say, well, why? Why aren't you doing that? It's easy enough to do. I've been to 5 already this month. Why aren't you doing it? So we always find with the events checklist, once people have done it once, it's really easy for them to repeat it and do it again, and people don't go back to doing them the non-neuro-inclusive way. So we want that to be the case here. So yeah, sing it from the rooftops if you do run a neuro-inclusive networking. It's really important.
I'm curious to ask. I would usually ask when we've got somebody on the podcast talking about a guide or some documentation that's been released. How long was the consultation process? How long was the process to bring it to publication? I'm more curious to ask today about what the approvals process was like, and how many people looked at this when you were kind of ready to publish it, and how many people actually said, yes, this is great, or yes, this is almost great, but I think you need to tweak this. I'm curious to how many people were involved in the actual approval side of it to say, I'm neurodiverse, and actually, if all these things were implemented, that would be great.
So we have some people within our group who identify, so within the APCO task force, who identify as neurodivergent. So we ran it past them. As I said, I work in Cambridge, and I'm a member of the university of Cambridge staff. So I talked with a lot of my colleagues here at Cambridge and ran the guide through them and sort of said this is tentative. But I think again with and I think this is something we kind of want to say about the guide, it is a living document. So for people out there in the audience land, if you're using it, if there are things that work or even don't work, or you've got ideas on how we can improve it, we'd love to know, we'd love to hear, because we want this to evolve as events evolve, as time goes on, so it remains a useful document. And that was one of the reasons why we came up with the guide. So when we put out the neurodiversity events checklist, we sort of said we don't want this to be a static document, we want this to evolve, we want to keep the momentum going, we want to be useful and helpful to event professionals and to venues as well, so that we're all coming together. And I think we'd kind of noticed as well over the year that people were working in silos, or people were bringing in different things. There was no place where everything was all coming together, and that was the whole purpose, that we came together and
Sure.
we have just built this hopefully this power train that will keep things moving and make things better for everybody who's attending events.
What's the process, Andy, of sort of future revisions to this now? Now that it is out there as a document for people to utilize and use within their own event operations, how easy is it for people to get in touch in order to offer any suggestions? And is there a sort of is there a plan in place and a timeline in place for when you will revise and look to produce further revisions of the document?
Yeah, so what we did with the events checklist, neurodiversity events checklist, is we were getting feedback consistently, and when it was its year anniversary, we launched 2.0. So what we did that based on the feedback we had. We sort of re-met as a group, spoke to a bunch of different people, and made, to be honest, quite small tweaks, but I think quite important tweaks. And as Anita said, this this isn't an abstract document. It only works if people actually try it and say, well, this is what it's like on the ground. And that's what we did with the neurodiversity events checklist. We made changes based on, people said, well, this thing's in the guide, but that's not practical. That's not really how events work. So we tweaked it to make it more practical. So I think the networking guide's only been out for about a month. It's only a month old. So when we get up to the year anniversary, we'll look at making an updated version. But yeah, again, it's really important that it is organic for all the reasons Anita mentioned. Technology changes, people change, our understanding of neurodiversity changes, best practice changes, law changes. So there's a million different factors that mean this has to be organic. It has to be a living document.
And it brings me, I guess, to the most obvious question of all, but a neat way to start rounding off today's episode is, how do people get it? Where do they need to go?
Andy, over to you.
It's on the Welcome Brain website. So I think the link is floating below my head. So,
there we go. Yes. On the screen now. For those of you watching today, welcomebrain.com/neuro inclusive -networking -guide. I'll do that one more time. welcomebrain.com/neuro inclusive -networking -guide. That's on the screen now for people watching. We'll also put a link to that in the description of today's podcast. I'll keep it on the screen for a few more seconds so that people can note it down. It is actually relatively simple, but a few characters in there. So hopefully people have got it. But yes, it will be in the description for today's podcast. So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, just check out the description that's either below or on the screen where you get your audio podcasts from, and you'll see a link to that. I have got my copy just before we literally hit record on today's episode. My copy pinged through, so I'll be having a good read through that. And as I said, it's stuff that I've encountered in my day-to-day working life, working as a freelancer in events, at conferences, at what I guess you would call a lot of very sort of stereotypical business conferences around the country. I've seen examples of this on many, many occasions where I've thought, hold on, it's not just about people of a neurodivergent background and making them accessible. A lot of these things, and I think we said that at the very start, Anita, a lot of the changes that you can make that on the face of it are including or being more inclusive to people with neurodivergent aspects, actually will have an impact, a positive impact on your entire delegate or your attendee list because of those subtle changes. And it'd be interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having a good read through it and seeing what I can implement. And guys, please do stay in touch about this. Further revisions. We'd love to see how this is being accepted and how the rollout is going across the industry. As the time comes when there is feedback, when there is some reporting, some stats, some data, anything like that you want to feed back to the industry. It'd be great to have you on a future episode.
Thank you.
That'd be great. James, let us know your thoughts as well when you've been through it. If you run it at any of your events, tell us how it worked, what you've put in place and how it worked for you, because obviously your feedback, we can bring that back into the guide again.
Absolutely, be delighted to. I'm really pleased today that my guests have been Anita Macdonald, Marketing Manager at Meet Cambridge, and Andy Williamson, Founder at Welcome Brain Consulting, talking today about the new Neuro Inclusive Networking Guide that launched at the Meeting Show just a few weeks ago. As we've said, available now to anybody that works in the events industry. And just one more time, really important before we round off today, welcomebrain.com/neuro inclusive networking guide is the link that you need to go to in order to download your free copy of this guide. Thanks very much to both my guests today. And just a couple of bits for event industry news before we wrap up today's episode. If you're watching today's episode on the website, thank you very much for doing so. Please do make sure that you're checking out the latest news, features, special supplements that are available on the website. And please do also make sure that you go to wherever you get your audio podcasts from and make sure that you like and subscribe to make sure that you get notified when the latest episodes drop. If you have listened to us today via one of those audio podcast platforms, thank you very much for listening. And please do make sure that you go in the opposite direction. Head over to eventindustrynews.com where you can watch all of these podcasts as videos on the podcast page, and also check out all those news, features, special supplements, and of course the A to Z supplier directory. If you work in the industry and you're looking for a product, service or supplier, the chances are you'll find it on the supplier directory within eventindustrynews.com. Thanks very much again to my guests today, and we will see everybody on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye.